The proposal to drop the patents for vaccine, well, it hasn't gone really far. At the EIU, we had always been a bit skeptical because we thought that the proposal might be one step in the right direction, but there would be a number of other issues to fix to get the vaccines to developing economies, production being one issue, but also training the workforce to develop the vaccines, transferring the technology. And then there was the question of the incentives for pharmaceutical companies to then make investments in the future in other vaccines. So I would say, actually, to answer your question, there's really no easy answer to this question. And it's very hard to see how developing economies are going to get access fast to vaccines, because when you're developing economies, well, you have three options to get vaccines at the moment. You have COVAX, as we've just discussed, it's not really delivering vaccines as it would like to do. The second possibility is donations from wealthier countries, but actually the discussion in wealthier countries is now shifting towards administering third doses or vaccines, or administering vaccines to children. And at any rate, we had these big promises, for instance, delivering 1 billion vaccines when it was the G7. That was the proposal of the G7, and it was accepted by all the countries. But when we take a look at the data on the ground, well, really donations are, well, not really happening on the ground. So wealthier countries, also not an option. And so it paves the way for Russia and China to do what has been called vaccine diplomacy. That's the third option for emerging countries to get jabs. And we also take a look at this topic in our white paper, and we found that
well, I was going to actually pick up on that, because the vaccine diplomacy angle is a really interesting one, especially when these vaccines started to be rolled out. There was some concern that maybe the West would fall behind China and Russia when it came to deploying their own vaccines to the rest of the world, an area that Russia and China quickly wanted to seize on. But you point out in your report that Russia have not been very successful, and China, even in the case where they have been successful, actually, due to the lower efficacy of their vaccine, the results have been mixed on the ground.
Yes, absolutely. So Russia and China had seized this opportunity to essentially increase their footprint in the emerging world with vaccine diplomacy. But a few months afterwards, when we take a look at the results, we can say that Russia's vaccine diplomacy has been a failure so far for a number of reasons. There's a lot of hesitancy towards getting the Russian shot, which is still not approved by the WHO. Russia is also facing some production issues to deliver the second shot of its vaccine, because the first and second shot of the Russian Sputnik V vaccine are not exactly the same. So it's really difficult for Russia to make headways on the vaccine diplomacy front. By contrast, China is really roaring ahead. It's the biggest exporter of vaccines in the world, but this poses risks actually for emerging countries, because there are doubts about the efficacy of some Chinese vaccines, which means that some emerging countries might have to inoculate third shots of vaccines if they have massively used Chinese vaccines. This is something that's already happening, for instance, in Thailand or in Chile, which mostly relied on Chinese vaccines. And the other point is that a number of Western countries do not recognize Chinese vaccines. So people who receive these shots will probably face problems to travel to Western economies, and this is going to deepen the divide between richer economies and poorer economies that mostly relied on Chinese vaccines.